Cullercoats is a small village on the north-east coast of England, adjacent to Tynemouth. The land which became the site of Cullercoats was originally owned by Tynemouth Priory, but had been seized by the Crown in 1539. It was offered for sale in 1588 and was purchased by the Delaval brothers, later passing into the hands of Thomas Dove. A storm demolished the end of the quay in 1710, and excessive costs prevented repair work from ever being carried out. During the same period, difficulties with the coal working at Whitley affected shipments from Cullercoats and Jacobite uprising of 1715 unsettled the country's trade in general. 11 years later, the salt pans are transferred further up the coast to Blyth, marking the decline of Cullercoats harbour for exports, although oats and wool continued to be transported from there. By 1800, the village had a population of 452. Cullercoats is described in these early years of the 19th century as a small bathing town inhabited chiefly by fishermen, with the ruins of an old pier and wagonway for coals behind the village and neglected Quaker burial ground. The story of Grace Darling. Grace's father was a lighthouse keeper. It was his job to clean and look after the lamp at the very top of the lighthouse and to keep it burning all through the night to guide the sailors safely back home. From the time she was just a baby, Grace lived with her family in a cottage next to the lighthouse where her father worked. But when she was 10, they moved to another tiny island called Donstone, 6 miles off the coast of Northumberland. They had no neighbours on this island. Their only neighbours were the seabirds, screeching for food, and sometimes the seals that came up onto the rocks. And this time, Grace and her family lived right inside the lighthouse. Grace had to get used to a world where everything was round. Curved rooms, curved walls, curved doors. Even the stairs spiraled round and round the very top, where the light sent its bright beam across the sea, warning ships about the dangerous rocks. Grace and her family spent most of their time in the room on the ground floor, a living room, kitchen, and dining room all in one. Every night, Grace would climb the spiral staircase to her small round bedroom on the next floor. She loved that room. She could look across the sea, and with her telescope, she could sometimes see ships and boats, sea animals, and other islands. In the early hours of the morning, she got out of bed, took out her telescope, and looked out at the storm. The waves were so high, like wild leaping horses. She spotted something out in the far distance, and it looked like a boat. She focused the telescope carefully and found that some dark shape. It was a boat for sure, and it seemed to have broken in half on the rocks. Grace's mother was on watch in the light room, and her father was sleeping, but she ran into his room and shook him awake. Looking over the North Sea, beacon-like, St. George's Church was designed by the church architect John Loughborough Pearson and built in 1884 by the 6th Duke of Northumberland. The church, in particular its impressive spire of 180 feet, was used as a navigational aid by the fishermen of Cullercoats, as well as by major shipping approaching Tynemouth in times gone by. This is a significant landmark in Cullercoats, symbolic of the community's faith and affinity with the sea. After persuading her father, they both took out 1 oar each and rowed for a mile, out towards the rock. It was hard and dangerous work, but as they got closer to the rock, they saw people waving and heard them calling out for help. There were 9 people clinging to the rock, but their boat, the steamship called the Foreshire, had already sunk deep into the ocean. Grace and her father managed to get 5 of the people, including 1 woman, into the rowing boat, and although they were tired and cold, they rowed back to the lighthouse as fast as they could. Once there, Grace helped everyone inside to warm by the stove. She made porridge and hot tea, whilst her father and one of the men went back to the rock to get the other survivors. Thanks to Grace and her father, these 9 people survived the storm and the shipwreck. News of their bravery got around and became front-page news. Grace Darling became known all over the land. She even got a letter from the Queen. People sent her letters and gifts which arrived by boat to that little lighthouse on the tiny island. Today, there's a museum in Bamburgh which tells you the story of Grace Darling. And if you ever go there, you can see the boat which Grace and her father used to rescue everyone on the night of the great storm.